Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. We're excited to have you with us. My name is Amy Perkins, and I'm the Marketing Manager for Early Childhood Assessment Tools here at Brooks Publishing. This webinar is on transdisciplinary play-based assessment and intervention for young children. And Tony Linder, the developer of TPBA and TPBI, is going to share a presentation about the tool. But first, I'd like to go over some housekeeping tasks. You'll be muted for the webinar, but if you have any questions during the presentation, you can type them into the question box on your GoToWebinar panel, or you can tweet them using hashtag #TalkAboutTools. We'll take these questions after Tony's presentation during the Q&A. For best audio and screen quality, you may want to exit any unneeded programs. Also for the presentation, you might want to minimize the GoToWebinar bar on your monitor so you can see more of your screen, so you can see Tony's presentation. You can do that by clicking on the orange button with the arrow in the top corner of the control bar. And if you would need to enlarge the bar again to ask a question, you can just click on the orange button and it'll pop back up. Also, we're recording this webinar, and you'll receive a link to the recording and a follow-up email tomorrow. We'll also post a link to the recording on the Brooks Publishing website. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Tony Linder. Dr. Linder has been a professor in the Child, Family, and School Psychology program in the Morgridge College of Education at the University of Denver since 1976. She's been a leader in the development of authentic assessment for young children and is nationally and internationally known for her work on transdisciplinary play-based assessment and transdisciplinary play-based intervention. In addition, she's developed Read, Play, and Learn, storybook activities for young children, the transdisciplinary play-based curriculum, which is an inclusive literature and play-based curriculum for preschool and kindergarten learning and development. Dr. Linder is also the director of the Play and Learning Assessment for the Young clinic at the University of Denver, where professionals and student teams conduct transdisciplinary play-based assessment for young children and their families. She consults widely on assessment, intervention, early childhood education, and family involvement issues. Dr. Linder has conducted research on a variety of topics, including transdisciplinary influences on development, parent-child interaction, curriculum outcomes, and the use of technology, professional development in rural areas. So we're very glad to have Tony with us today. So I think, Tony, we can turn it over to you now for the presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks. And greetings to all of the participants who have joined us. I'm going to be going through just a quick overview of the play-based assessment and intervention process, and then if you have questions, I'll try to address those. The assessment is really based on developmental sequences. It's an assessment of children from birth to 6 years old. The orange book that you see on the screen is basic content material that is covered, like the manual for the test. And the little box up in the corner is the CD, which has all the forms for the assessment process on it. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the rationale for doing a play-based assessment as opposed to some of the more traditional approaches that we use. One reason, obviously, is that it is an authentic model. We are really looking at how children function doing things that they like to do as opposed to sitting at a table and doing things that adults tell them to do. It's developmentally appropriate. One of the nice things about the play assessment is it can be modified for any functioning level that the child shows during the assessment. It's very child-oriented. We begin with toys and materials that the child knows and likes, so the child is motivated to engage in the activities that are presented. We then introduce other materials to arouse the child's curiosity and see what skills the child has. It's a very family-focused assessment. Parents are involved before, during, and after the assessment in a meaningful way, and I'll talk about that more later on. It is team collaboration. The model is based on using team members and having all team members look at the child holistically. So they're not just cutting the child in pieces and looking at their segment of the child. it does end up in a very comprehensive amount of information, and that information is useful information as opposed to just numbers. We end up with information that will help us develop program plans and recommendations for intervention. The assessment covers a variety or all the developmental domains that are required by most programs. We look at the sensory motor development and include a vision screening there, which we have found to be very helpful, functional vision screening. We look at the emotional and social area, the communication area, and a brief hearing screening. And then the cognitive area, which in addition to cognitive processes also looks at math, science, and literacy skills. There are a variety of different disciplines that can be included in teams. I'm going to name some of those, but keep in mind you don't have to have. In fact, I don't know any team that has all of the possible members that it could. But those include a psychologist, speech-language pathologist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, teacher, and that could be a regular specialist, a hearing specialist, and a nurse. And again, most teams do not have all of these people, but are able to call in some of these professionals as they're needed depending on the reason for a referral for the child. In addition to the disciplines that the people represent, team members also play roles on the TPBA2 team. One person acts as a family facilitator, and that is the person who is the support system for the family through the process. One person is a play facilitator, and that person is responsible for eliciting information about all of the domains for the other people who are watching. We do videotape the assessment so that anyone who wants to can go back and review that. It's helpful with parents, and it's helpful if not all members of the team were able to be there. And then whoever else is available are the observers of the process. I'm going to go through the various components of the TPBA and the sequence of the process. The first thing is obtaining preliminary information. We've discovered that it's very important to get the information from families prior to seeing the child. It makes for a much better assessment and planning for the assessment the more we know about the child before we actually see them. And I'll talk about that in a second. The second phase or step is the planning meeting, and that's where we take all the information that we have. This occurs on the day of the assessment, and it's usually right prior to doing the play assessment. That's a very short planning meeting, but the family facilitator summarizes the preliminary information, and the team talks about what needs to take place. The next phase is actually the play session itself, which is usually 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes longer if the child takes a little while to warm up or if the child has some fairly severe motor concerns. Right after the play session, we usually do about a 10-minute, 15-minute debriefing with the family. This is not to identify whether the child is eligible, but just to give the family some kind of feedback. It's usually to get their information about how they felt about the process, to elicit from them what they see as some of the child's strengths that they saw during the assessment, and also to give them some ideas about what may be next steps for their child, and then what the next steps in the assessment process are. Then the parents leave, and following that, the team needs to have a discussion where they can compare their notes, look at the age tables and the guidelines, and determine what the child's if the child's eligible and what the strengths and needs are in terms of intervention. And obviously, the next step is the report writing. So I'm going to kind of walk through these. The preliminary information, as I mentioned, is the first step. The first book in the set of materials is the administrative guide, and this contains all the information about the research on play-based assessment, how to get the preliminary information. There's chapters on how to do parent facilitation, play facilitation, and samples of several different reports. The forms that I'm going to be showing you, which are difficult to see on the slides, you can see in more detail in the book. So there's three primary forms that we use with families. The first is the Child and Family History Questionnaire, which is a very comprehensive look at the child's developmental and health history. The second is the All About Me scale, which is sort of a quick and dirty look at how the parents perceive the child's skills, and allows the team to look at how the child is in the context of the home. We also have this form and the next form filled out by any caretakers other than the parents or preschool providers who may see the child, so that we can get information about the child across contexts. And the last form is the routines rating form. It's another quick form that just indicates how stressful different routines are to engage in with the child. And as I said, the All About Me and the routines rating are usually filled out both by the family and by other significant people in the child's life. We also look at previous testing and any other information that we have from other programs or therapy that the child has been involved in. Now, these forms, I said, are going to be hard to see, but I'm just giving you an idea of what they look like. The health history not only looks at some of the typical things that are on a form for developmental history, but also asks questions related to cultural values and perceptions of disability, and also some questions about family health history as well, which may have implications for the child. The All About Me questionnaire it asks the same questions that we're going to look at in the play assessment, but from the point of view of the parents and the family. So the sensory motor you'll see on this one, each of the 4 domains has questions on the left, and then the parents are given multiple choice responses in the middle, and they can write some examples. I have actually been really surprised parents really take a lot of time to write in the examples that they feel are important. The daily routines rating form just lists, as you can see, the routines down the day, such as diapering or toileting, feeding, bathing, how difficult or stressful that time is for the child, or how difficult or stressful it is for them. We can also use these tools to look at progress, both for the child and the family over time. So after that, we get all that information, we move into the planning meeting before the assessment and determine, based on what we found out, what other information we need that we may want to ask the parent about, what kinds of things we want to try to elicit and observe in the play assessment. We also then plan the play session. What toys and materials did the parents indicate were preferred by the child? Which ones do we want to try to introduce that may get at some things we want to see? What structure do we want to use? Do we want to have the parents come in right at the beginning? Do we want to involve peers or siblings, etc.? Do we need to use any adaptations? Is this a child where we want to look at using assistive devices? And how do we want to involve the family in the assessment process itself? Then we actually do the play session, and part of the play session is having a good play facilitator. It takes some practice to become a good play facilitator, and there's some key things that we try to focus on, including trying materials which are going to elicit a wide range of skills and not just specific items. We try to keep a balance of control between the child leading the play and the play facilitator who's trying to elicit questions or elicit skills. So we don't want it to look like a test. We want it to be play, and this is where the balance comes in. We have to include all domains, and we take cues from the other team members. The play facilitator takes cues from the other play observers about what else they might want to see for their domain. We also incorporate family and peers as appropriate. Sometimes siblings are there, which gives us an opportunity to look at how the child plays with other children. Sometimes if it's in a preschool environment where the assessment is being done, peers can be borrowed with permission of parents, of course, to come in and play with the child for a few minutes. The other part of the play session which is key is the parent facilitation. The parent facilitator, who as I said is one member of the team, and that can be rotated, it has to determine what other information is needed. We try not to have this be a question and answer session because the parent should also be watching the assessment and helping us to do some other things like determine what kinds of skills we're seeing or not seeing. We need for the parent facilitator to also provide information to the parents about what we're looking at so parents understand that it's not just play that we're watching, that this play we're looking for specific things. They may explain that in dramatic play we're trying to see if the child can sequence a series of actions or use objects functionally and so on. We also have the parent help us compare how what we're seeing, how that compares to what they see in the home or in the community with the child. Is this how much the child talks? Is this typical behavior for the child? So that we know that we're getting a valid sample of the child's behavior. And then we also can elicit from the parents any interpretations they have. Many times children come with speech articulation issues, and parents have sort of learned how to decode that so they can interpret for us what the child is saying. And they can also sometimes elicit or interpret behaviors. We'll ask the parent, what does that behavior mean to you? And it may mean something different to the parent than what it looks like to us. We also will involve the parent in the play at some point, as long as they are comfortable with that. We do want to be able to see how the child engages with someone familiar as opposed to a stranger. And even if the parents are not comfortable coming in and playing with the child, we usually involve them in snack because that is something that they feel comfortable with. The parents' involvement in the play is, as I said, a very important component, and it's important that they both be able to observe and participate to the level that they want to. We also want to have adaptations available and involve, by the way, if both parents are there, we do involve the father and the mother, usually separately because dads play differently than moms do. We also use the play assessment as a time to practice or try different intervention strategies, as this gives us information for developing better recommendations. So it's not only an assessment, it's also an experiment in intervention. Here you see, actually, this is me playing with a couple of children. The little boy on the left is the one who we are assessing, and the little boy on the right has been borrowed from a classroom in this particular center to come in just for a few minutes so we can see their social interactions. During that hour of observation, there are guidelines that we use in the play assessment that help guide our observations. So on this form you'll see this is from the communication area, and the very first column are those questions that we want to answer. The second column are the strengths. This is a strengths-based assessment, so we want to make sure that we identify what the child can do. And the third column is if we see anything that is of concern. The fourth, we can check off if we think it's an area that we want to look at for next steps. This can be used as a note-taking sheet, or it can be used as a reference tool. Some people take notes on other pieces of paper, but a lot of people like to use this because they can write all over it and check things off and that kind of thing. So there are the same forms or format for each of the domains. This is an optional note-taking form where the optional forms usually are laid out so there's space for each subcategory. Each of the 4 domains has 7 subcategories that we look at, and this one is a language one, and it's got, just on this page alone, it's got place to take language sample for what the child's understanding and also what production the child makes. Each of the 4 domains also has comprehensive age tables that start at 1 month and move up to 6 years. So the assessment can actually be used with any child, even older children, who are functioning below 6. And the way we use these is to identify the floor, or where the child passes all or most of the skills, and then move up to the ceiling where the child starts to reach an age level where very few items are being passed. But what we're looking for is the cluster age where the child is primarily falling. After we have done our observations, and I should note that during the assessment, team members don't have time to go into comprehensive detail on those 2 forms. We refer back to those forms after the assessment is over. But they do take a lot of scripting notes during the assessment. Right after the assessment, we want a quick debriefing with the parents so they don't leave without any information whatsoever. It's very common after an assessment for us to say to parents, oh, thank you very much for coming, and we'll get back to you in a couple of weeks. And that's very frustrating for parents. So we have found this debriefing session, even though it's very brief, is very useful to parents. We get their impressions of the assessment, whether it was typical, what they saw, what they liked, anything that surprised them, anything we didn't see that they wanted us to see, that kind of thing. We ask about the child's strengths from the parent's perspective, and then all of the team members in a dialogue, not a formal presentation, just present some of their ideas of some of the strengths that they saw and some of the next steps that they think the child is ready for. We also try to give them 1 or 2 ideas for home based on what we learned from observing the child during the play session, and then go over with them what are the next steps in the process for the IEP meeting, etc. The team discussion, this is a process that takes place after the parents are gone, but that team discussion is an informal discussion where team members are basically exchanging their observations, what they saw that someone else might not have noticed. They discuss age levels and make some quick comparisons there, and share any interpretations they have about what they think may be contributing to the child's developmental concerns. The report writing is the last part, and that we don't have a specific format for. That's really dictated by the district or the program, but we've offered several versions, from comprehensive to shorter versions in the text. And we do recommend that the team write one comprehensive integrated report as opposed to separate reports, and that they include in that report some functional recommendations, both for home and school, so that this report will be useful to those who get it. There is a summary form available that can help tie some of this together and can also be used for measuring progress. This is a goal attainment scale. This is an optional piece of the play-based assessment. The guidelines and the age tables are not optional, but this piece can be used if desired. And it really just helps us to look at a baseline for what should be the goals for the child, looking at some of that qualitative information, as well as helping to summarize the child's age level for each of the subcategories for those that have age tables. There's also a summary form for eligibility, and this is again optional depending on the forms that the districts use. But here the people that have observed the child can indicate in a really quick way what was the lowest, the highest, and the mode or the cluster where they saw the child for each domain, and if they had any qualitative concerns, and whether they feel this is more than a 25% delay, and that depends on your state. Some states have different than 25%. You would modify that. And then you indicate whether or not, in the informed clinical opinion of your team, this child is or is not eligible for services. There is also a fidelity checklist to try to help make sure that people are using the play-based assessment in the appropriate way and including all the key components so that it is a true play-based assessment and not some modified version. Then we move into intervention, and again, some people use the intervention process that goes with the TPBA, but it doesn't have to be used with the TPBA intervention model. But I think that almost everybody who I've talked to anyway finds the ideas in this intervention book to be exceedingly helpful. So the intervention book has a lot of content. It's actually quite a large volume. There's a chapter on each of the 4 domains, and in addition to that, there's a chapter on each of the 7 subcategories. So you can actually go, if the child has problems with attention, you can literally go to the attention chapter, and in that section you would find what would be some ways that you could work with that child. What would you see happening for in a typical situation? What are some principles that can be used for all kids? What are some interaction strategies that you might change in order to provide appropriate intervention? And what are some environmental modifications? Then we also give little vignettes to give examples and some summaries of how to look at it by developmental age. These are useful both for teachers and for families. We have several different forms in there, and again, these can be combined or used with whatever is in your district, or you can use your district forms and then just use these strategies from the book for helping you come up with ideas for home and school. This is an intervention plan, and on this we are trying to pick the priorities to work with the child, and these can be picked by domain or they can be picked by the OSEP child outcome priorities that preschools need to look at. The team would pick the priorities they want to work on with the child and then develop the different strategies. This is just a very simple tip sheet for that we have found is helpful for teachers and parents. And the team can use this to guide them in consultation about some ideas, some times that might be good to do in the natural routines of the day, some types of interaction strategies that might be helpful, and some environmental modifications that might be helpful. It's just a reminder. A lot of parents put this on their refrigerator. We also have that 1 to 9 scale again can be used, and the age tables can be used to monitor progress for the child. So here you see the 1 to 9 scale in language, and you'll see that on this you would have the baseline circled for where the child was at the time of the play-based assessment, and then you would indicate the number on the second rating or the third rating, so you can see if the child is making progress toward his peers, with the 9 being a typically functioning preschooler. These are not by age at all. These are all qualitative, step-by-step progressions, a functional movement, not by age. That we use the age tables then to look at whether or not the child has gained in terms of his age level, and the way we look at progress there is to look at whether or not there's a reduction in the percentage of delay that was first noted during the play-based assessment. And so teachers can can use these, or the team can come in and look at the child in the classroom again. So this allows us to look at changes in those priority areas that were identified, or the goals that were identified for the child. So basically we're coming to the end here, guys. Why do we do the TPBA and the TPBI? One is that we find that the results are very valid, both in terms of where we see children and the kinds of programs we develop for children, but also in terms of social validity and how parents perceive it and how team members perceive it. We do use it for eligibility and programming, which gives us, sort of a lot of information from one process as opposed to having to do 2 processes. And the third is that it ends up with very useful functional recommendations, and not only goals but also intervention strategies for the child. Plus, it is fun, and it's efficient, and it's cost effective, and families love it. We get emails all the time from families about what a wonderful experience it was, how they were afraid about going into the assessment, but they left feeling really positive about the whole process. I think that's the main reason we do it. And we do have trainings that we do anywhere from 1 to 3 days. Typical training for teams are like 2 days, and then I have a 5-day training that I do in an institute here in Denver in the summer. This summer it will be July 8th to 12th, and that 5-day training you actually do assessments with kids every day, so it's a very in-depth, hands-on training. And then I think that Amy, are you taking back over here?
Sure. Thank you, Tony, so much for sharing all that information. That was great. So we're going to do a Q&A session now with Tony. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and submit them in the question box as part of that's on your GoToWebinar panel. I think I saw someone with their hand raised during the presentation. So if you had a question, if you can just put that in the question box, I'll be able to see it and read it off to Tony. But on your screen right now, as a thank you for joining us today, we have a special 20% offer on your screen. So you can save 20% on any of the TPVA products, which you can see, and as well as any of our other Brooks products. Tony kind of walked through some of the products, but there's the administration guide that has all of the forms in the back. The orange cover is the assessment volume, and the purple cover is the intervention volume that has all of those strategies that Tony was showing you. The Observing Cassandra is a DVD and a workbook package. So you can watch a DVD of an actual play-based assessment, and then you have you can use it for staff training and your staff, or you can practice scoring, and then you compare it to, I guess, the correct scoring. So you can kind of use it as a training exercise. And there's also the image in the lower corner is the form CD. So instead of buying paper forms or copying the forms from the back of the administration guide, the forms are available on a CD-ROM that you can just put on your computer and print them off as you need them. So the code for the 20% discount is Webinar S13. It's on your screen up there, and you can use that through the end of June. So let me check our question box now. So okay. So how many team members should participate in an assessment?
That really varies. In an infant program, a lot of times 2 people will go to the home. Again, if it's videotaped, then any questions that those 2 people have about the child, they can take that videotape back and show it to other team members. My preference is that each of the 4 domains has an observer. Sometimes that is a psych, speech, OT, and teacher, early childhood special ed or regular ed teacher. So 4 people allows you to cover all of those areas. A lot of teams only have 3 people, and the psychologist may cover both cognitive and social emotional. The people like the vision specialist or a hearing specialist are usually brought in if there is a concern about vision. Sometimes PTs also are not brought in unless there are larger motor concerns. So I would say 3 to 4 is best, and even with the infant team having backup. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Tony. Okay, we have a question. Where do you go to get more information for on-site training? So on the Brooks Publishing website, you can go to brooksonlocation.com, and there's some information about on-site training if you would want Tony to come to your program and do staff training. We have a description of some different time frames and the information that's covered, and that's on brooksonlocation.com. And if we're going to send out, in your follow-up email tomorrow, we're going to send some information about the 5-day training that Tony was mentioning. So you'll have that.
Yeah, and I'll just tell you now, too, that if you want to contact me about that personally, it's tony.linder@gmail.com.
Great. Thanks, Tony. Let's see. So we have a question about eligibility. How can TPVA be used for eligibility?
In most states, there is an option for different ways to doing assessments of kids. Many states have percentage of delay as an option. and TPBA has no problem with that. With the states, and Colorado, where I'm from, is one of those states where they do have as a requirement some standardized testing with there may be 1.5 standard deviations required or 2.0 standard deviations required. Most of the states who have that also have secondary options if kids cannot be tested using those approaches. And what our state has indicated, because they actually prefer the play assessment method, is that if all they have to do is to indicate in their report the justification for using this to get a valid result for the child, that the child was not able to attend to a standardized test, or that the standardized test would have not given appropriate answers or whatever. So most states accept that 25% or more delay is the equivalent of 1.5 standard deviations.
Great, thanks, Tony. Okay, I think I see one more question. This is a question about the meeting that happens after after the assessment, the debriefing. I think you described it. So can you describe a little bit about the meeting? How do the different team members go about deciding goals?
We're not exactly setting goals during that meeting, because that's going to be what happens with the IEP. What we're doing in this meeting is just giving the parents some feedback and some ideas. So typically what we do is we actually write it on a piece of paper and give it to the parents. I usually write strengths on one side and what I'm ready for on the other. I start with the parent and I say, tell me some things you really like about your child. What are some things you think he does well? And then we'll jump in and we'll say, yeah, I saw that, and he's beginning. I think the fact that he's really beginning to use words is a real strength for him. He's starting to pay more attention to his peers. Whatever the things are that we see, we kind of bop around and add to that list on the left. And then what we do is we take some of the things that we think are key that we saw, and we build on those strengths. So for example, if the child is just beginning to use one-word phrases or whatever, we may have that as a strength because the child is beginning to use them. But then on the ready for side, we might say that he's ready to increase the number of words that he's using to request objects or something like that. So what that does is it gives the parents some ideas of what are some of the next steps, but then we're also going to use that as a foundation for some of what we're going to put in the report. So we'll pick 4 or 5 things that end up on that right side of things I'm ready for, and then when the parent goes to the IEP meeting, they're really already sort of prepared for that, because we've already talked about what some of the next steps are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, great. That was a good description. Thanks for providing that. So if anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and enter them now. I think if I don't see any new questions, I think we're almost at the end here. So I'll wait a few more seconds. Okay, so I think we've probably answered questions. So thank you very much for joining us, and Tony, thank you for sharing your presentation with us. And everyone will be receiving a copy of the recording in an email tomorrow, so feel free to share that with others in your program or other colleagues. Invite them to watch our webinar. And we do have other webinars in our webinar series on our Brooks Publishing website, so you're welcome to sign up for more of those. We thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.